Hi everyone, Sasha, co-founder of Coding Rooms here. Thank you for joining us for our first ever product live stream. And today we're going to be talking about using JUnit 4 to auto-grade assignments on Coding Rooms. I know we started a bit late. We had some issues getting everything set up and all the links sent, but either way, this will all be recorded and you can come back to it at any time. So thank you all for joining us live, and we'll jump right into it. So today, the agenda is that we'll go over the Coding Rooms data and architecture first. So what is a course? What is a section of students? And how do questions and assignments connect into all those data types and answer questions like where would my gradebook be? And how does my gradebook connect to the content that I'm building? Because we do some things differently in this flow compared to some other applications. The next step is the JUnit 4 step. So we'll actually talk a little bit about what JUnit is, what we can do with it, and how auto-grading will make your assignments better for you and your students. And then finally, we'll talk about how all this works on Coding Rooms, and I'll actually be using the product as we go through all the different steps. As far as your participation in the live stream, we'd appreciate everyone on YouTube, FB, and Twitch if you want to chat with us. We're monitoring the chat and we'll be getting to questions on a rolling basis. And there will also be some sort of more formal time to respond to questions at the end. And then we'll actually be live in our Facebook group, as always, to answer further follow-up questions if you're watching the recording. So without further ado, let's get into this. So I will be sharing my screen through our software here. So I am now in Coding Rooms as a brand new user, so this might be familiar for you if you're just starting with Coding Rooms recently. And on the side, I have classrooms, courses, and workspaces. There's also this new feature, assessments, that's in private beta, so not all of you will have that yet. But we'll focus today on courses. So a course is the top level object, if you will, in Coding Rooms. So when I create a new course, I create a title for this, JUnit webinar. Intro to JUnit Auto-grading on Coding Rooms. And we can select a default language. You can actually change this language at any time, and you can also create assignments in different languages. This is purely a default. And then the next data type that we encounter is the course section. And the section is actually where you group your students and link content and manage grades. So if I teach AP Computer Science and I have 3 sections of students, I can actually use a single course with a single set of content for all 3 sections, but I can independently manage the student roster and the gradebook and the assignment schedule for each section. So if one section's ahead of the other, for example, you can very easily assign things based on their progress. So for now, I'll just create one section, call it section A, and we create the course. So the first thing when we jump into the course is we'll actually see the list of sections, and here I only have one. And then the piece that's most important to this webinar is questions. So in Coding Rooms, to create assignments, you first have to create a question. And the question is like a schema for your assignment. And we do this in order to maintain sort of good separation of concerns between the content that you're building and the actual usage of that content by students. So I'm going to add a question here. So our first question. Create that. And now we jump into our question editor. So the first thing you'll notice about the question editor is that there is no save buttons aside from a couple tabs that I'll talk about as we progress here. but everything auto-saves. So as you type, it will save, and if there's an error saving it, you'll actually get a message, and you can check your internet connection, for example. But otherwise, everything I write here will be auto-saved. And when I actually want to assign this to students, then there's a separate assign tab, and I can assign it out to the separate sections. And one neat thing is that you can actually assign the same question multiple times to a single section. So it's really flexible. Now that we are ready to start talking about auto-grading, I want to cover a little bit about what JUnit is and how it fits into the sort of roadmap that we're covering today with the questions and assignments in coding rooms. So JUnit, and the particular version we use in coding rooms is JUnit 4, is a testing framework for Java. So instead of, for example, running a student's code and checking for an output, which we would do with input-output testing, which students can quite easily hack, especially if we tell them the output. So for example, if we're checking for an output of 3, and instead of writing the whole algorithm, the student could just, if they know the test cases, could just do system.out print line 3, right? And we could give them full credit for doing that. Whereas JUnit actually goes into each of the methods that the student wrote in their code, calls them, and can call them with lots of different data very quickly, or even randomly generated data, and can tell you whether or not the student's code adheres to what is expected. So it's much better and more flexible as a testing framework, because you're no longer boxed into doing this basic system I/O, right? Especially if you need to test not only the final result, but also middle results. So for example, if I need to first make a copy of an array and then sort it, in JUnit you could check that they make the copy correctly. Then you could also do another test case to make sure that they sort it correctly, and you can even give partial credit based on those different outputs. So I'll jump into what that looks like in coding rooms. So when I'm creating a question, I have a Markdown editor here, and Markdown is a standard text-based format for creating richly formatted text. So I can add a header here, for example, and say this is our prompt, and today we're going to start with a simple adder example. So I can say let's implement addition in Java using a new adder class, and I can use the single backticks that will get formatted as code. And if you want to see what this would look like for a student, you can open the preview, and the preview will actually show you the different formatting options. And we can use triple backticks to get a formatted block. So we can say, let's say we're going to expect 2 + 3 to equal 5. We can say this is our expected results. You can check that all this works correctly. Cool. We can close the preview. This is all auto-saved. And then the next step is to build the template. So in coding rooms, the template is one of the things that you need to save the revisions manually. So we'll go through the whole process here of building out your template. Initially, we start with just a plain old Java hello world, and we can run it here. And then we can also use our new instance beta functionality. So you can actually click start here and run this with an interactive terminal. This is the same as you would be doing it in the classroom if you're using the interactive terminal. So we can run this here again. Let's see. Cool, we got our hello world output. And this is really fantastic if you're using the reader or your reading standard in, because you don't have to actually pre-fill the input here. You can do it interactively through the terminal. Anyway, let's get back to our main track here. So I can create our adder.java class, and this is where the student's code will actually go. So in the template, we can drop a message saying, please check adder.java to build your solution. And we can even do some sample implementations for the students so they can actually try out their code prior to submitting and running the test cases. So we're going to implement a function called adder.add, and the first one, let's say we'll only do one example, will be 2 and 3. And let's implement our adder class. So I'll leave an empty constructor here for now, but I don't think we'll need that. And then we can do public int add, and let's do int x and y. And we can return 0 and drop a note here for the students to implement your solution below. Go back, double check everything looks good. We can run our code. So we run it, we got 0, which is our expected result here. So I will save the changes for the template. So far, to recap, what we've done is we've created a course, which is where we're going to be building all of our content. We created a section, which is where our class roster and assignments will live. And we've also just created our first question, which is essentially a template with some grading cases for labs. The next few steps will be doing the model solution and test cases, as well as assigning out to students. Let's do our next step here. So some people from here would like to immediately go to the test bench and build the test cases. You can honestly choose whatever format suits you best, whether you want to start with the tests or start with the solution, but I'll quickly just implement the solution here since this is a fairly straightforward problem. So the nice thing is when we look in our model solution, the template is already pre-filled. So I can go into adder here and let's write our implementation, x plus y, and we can run it and do a quick check, see everything works. So we expected for 2 plus 3 to equal 5, and that's what we're getting. So we'll save the model solution. In the future, you'll be able to run your model solution against the test cases instantly. But for right now, the model solution tab only supports just running it in the sort of standard environment, not yet linking it to test cases. So let's create our first test case. And actually the very first test case I want to build is input-output. Before we jump into all of the details and nitty-gritty of JUnit 4, doing an example with input-output will kind of also help to illustrate what the use case is for JUnit, right? So let's check that the output is 5, and for the title I like to do a nice sort of human readable title so that students can kind of understand what the point of that test case is. So I can add some feedback on failure. Oops, sure to print out your result, and again I can open preview, that's just plain text, and we can select our comparison method. We're doing flexible equality. I'll just say, let's make sure it contains an exact value. We don't pass any standard in for the student here, so we're just going to verify the output as 5, or it contains 5 at least once. This is our first test case, and actually right now we've kind of completed the entire workflow for building a question and coding rooms. You could immediately go and assign this out to students, and in fact I will do that right now. So going to click on Assign, Assign to Section. You can choose another name, although the name carries over from the section, and this is where it will become available for your students. And I'll leave it unpublished for now. Let's check out what that looks like. This would be the student view, and let's invite a student. So I will actually copy a student join link, and this is the same way that you would go about inviting students. And I'm going to join from a new window here as a student. And this is the same flow that your students would be going through. So I'll kind of illustrate this whole process here. So I'll sign up with another email address as a pretend student. And I just joined the course. So now I'm in as a student, so I'll be able to walk through a little bit what that student experience looks like. And I'll go ahead and even can change my name to be Demo Student. Let's save this. Update our profile. Cool. So now I'm going to go back into the instructor view. So I'm back as the instructor. And we can actually get this assignment live by going back to our question and clicking the Assign tab and publishing it. So right now it's not yet visible for our students. When I click Publish, it will show up in the list, and this all auto saves. So now I'm in here as a student, and when I click on the assignments, I'll actually have the first lab here. The questions in IO testing, just from a comment here, are available for all languages. And even you can also create manual test cases. So for folks who are using other languages, or if you don't want to do auto-grading, you can, if you don't want to do a unit testing framework, you can jump in with the IO check, or you can create a manual test case, and the manual test case will make it possible for you to just go in and manually look at the submissions. And as far as the student view from the instructor side, that is also supported. I'll note that down to cover it in a moment here. But now I'll just jump in as my demo student, and this is going through this actual student view. And the first thing that they will receive is your prompt. They can check out what the assignment is about, and they can see their submissions. So I haven't created any submissions yet, and if I check what this looks like in this current state for the instructor will see that they have a demo student who has 0 submissions and the top score is 0%, and this button is grayed out. Once I create my first submission, this will actually appear, and we'll kind of jump into what that does, because that's another really cool, unique feature of coding rooms. So now back in here as a student, I'm going to start working on the assignment. So I'm in here. The very first thing you'll notice is we start loading the template. So the template loads for the student, and they will have access to the same code that you created in the template environment, and they can also use instances for that interactive input. First, I will jump in as a student, kind of play around. I can run the code, and running is separate from creating a submission. So the students can run. This doesn't trigger a submission workflow, or trigger the submission workflow. And they can resize here. We'll go ahead and create a submission to illustrate what this whole process kind of looks like before we get much deeper here. So very first thing is we didn't pass our first test case. So for no input, we expected output 5, but we got 0. So we actually scored 0% for this test case. And I can see my submissions history here. And I can always look back. So unlike some other platforms, where there's like a submission and then teacher review or whatever, in coding rooms, anytime they want to run the test cases, that counts as a submission, and that actually enables you to identify students who are basically just submission hacking, who are, if it takes you 20 submissions to get to a decent score and you're starting with 0, it's kind of pretty obvious what your workflow is, and we make it really easy for instructors in the gradebook to see that. So when we refresh, we'll see that we have one submission from that student, and they will have a score of 0. So loading the gradebook here. So submissions 1 and top score 0. But the neat thing is now I can click this button here, and this will actually take me into the student workspace in real time. So let's say the student is having trouble. I can actually move around here. I've got a couple workspaces open here. So I'm in a student view out here, and I can actually code in real time. So if students are having trouble with the submission, or you want to see how students are building the submission, you can play around with it here and drop comments, or you can also highlight and add a comment as well. So I know this is a little small, but yeah, that whole flow. This is a unique thing that Coding Room supports, and you'll see that it's actually 2 people live in this workspace right now. So quickly implement the solution x plus y and do another submission. And I'm in here as demo student. That's my first record here. So I'll do a submission again. And I'm running this as the student. You see our submission pops in live, and we passed the first input-output test case. Cool. So now as the teacher, I can do the same thing. I can refresh the submissions, and I see a student got 100% on this test case, and I can also view the details of what ran. So you have that full history available to you, and some new features that will be coming soon are the ability to create cooldown periods, as well as limitations on submissions, and whether or not you want students to be able to see the test cases that failed, or whether or not they should just get a percentage or nothing at all. So a quick recap of what we've done so far is, from the last recap, is that we added in our model solution. We built our first test case, which was a standard in, standard out test case. We joined in as a student, and the student created a couple of submissions, and we got to a place where our first test case is passing. The next thing we'll do is build our JUnit test cases. So I will exit here as the instructor, so I'm leaving the student workspace. And going back in time here, and we can edit the question, and we'll have a little bit better linking between questions and assignments soon as well, because I understand that that's a couple clicks right now. But let's actually create a new test case, and this will be our first JUnit test case. So the default language for the course is Java, and so when we select unit test, that will automatically bring us to JUnit 4, because we do support auto-grading for a handful of other languages as well, with different unit testing frameworks. So this one will be check that positive integers are added correctly. So we'll scroll down here, and we have our test case and how many points it's worth. And we can give some feedback. So if they fail this test case, check that you're performing addition in the added JUnit.add method. And you see that we selected unit testing framework JUnit 4. So the very first thing you'll notice when you drop into the unit testing view is that you have code. So JUnit tests are plain Java, basically, just with JUnit stuff imported and with some annotations. So the before, after, and test. The at before setup, this is run once for all the test cases in this file. So we can do something like a write to a file here. So for example, if we want to have a data file, we can use plain old Java file IO here to write to a file that will then be available in our default test cases when we run the student code, for example. And then you can also rename these cases as well, but I'll just leave this blank for now. So we have access to the student's code directly since we're in the same package with the student. So I can do, for example, adder a equals new adder. And this is where the first JUnit utility comes in. So JUnit has a bunch of different utilities, and we'll go into them later, but we'll start with assert equals. So assert equals verifies that the first argument is equal to the second argument. And in JUnit, we don't have to, I mean, it's technically imported from here, org.junit.assert equals, but we made it available for you by default, so it's a shorter notation. And let's check a couple test cases. So we want to check that, first of all, our base test, that 2 and 3 is equal to 5. But here we can, in line, check a few other things. So we can go ahead and check that 1 plus 4 is 5. And then we can check that, let's say there's some big number plus 1 equals another big number, and we can do, let's say, what if the numbers are the same? So of course this is kind of a trivial sort of test case here, but it quite neatly sort of illustrates what it's like to be setting up JUnit code, and the fact that I feel like frequently instructors and myself as well, we're always afraid by hearing like new frameworks, right? Because I feel like, oh, it's a big framework that's going to be so much for me to learn. And that is true. Like, you can go really in depth with JUnit and do tons of incredible things, but that you don't have to do all of that to get started with JUnit. We can create these test cases in just like, what is this, sort of 5-6 lines of code inside of the template that's already given to you by coding rooms, and all this will run without any further setup. So actually we're done building the test case. Right now, in order to test this out, we can go into the mock student view from the instructor side. So as the instructor, I can go into the assignment. I can unpublish it for now, go and let's do in a new tab to the overview. And I'm actually dropping into the student view right now. So since it's not published, students won't actually have this pop up in the list, so I can play with it myself just as the instructor. And let's make sure that our test cases work. So we remember that our standard IO checker is just looking for 5. So I can go ahead and print out 5 here, run the code, say, now I think our code works there, so we can do a submission again. And this time what we're looking for is a pass on the standard out grader and a fail on the unit test grader. And the entire actual grading process will come from coding rooms. So you can build all your test cases out in JUnit, but actually the calculation of the final score is done entirely on our side. You don't have to build any special logic for that. That's just done calculating by pass fail and then multiplied by the points. So as we expected, we scored 10% because our standard out grader worked. We verified our output is 5, but oops, we failed the test case. So the student will get a pretty kind of obvious message that they failed, but this by default does not tell them what they failed. So that's another nice thing about the cases, is that they can see that the assertion error said it expected 0 and 5, but they actually don't know what the input was. So this is not to, let's say, intentionally hide these things from students, but it does quite clearly communicate that they need to work on their code again. So let's fix this. If we go into our adder class, we can do x plus y. Let's do a quick run and verify that everything compiles. Cool, our code still works, and we can do another submission. So another neat thing with coding rooms while we wait for the submission to come out is that you can also look through the submission history and play back the code to check kind of, okay, the student submitted this many times, but what was the process behind that to get to that stage? Now we're passing our test case. Cool. So you didn't even have to share the testing data with the students. Everything's just kind of automated by JUnit, and we got our positive integers added correctly with a nice check mark here. I'm going to close this and go back to our question editor. We can publish it, and then it will become available again for students. They can go in and create the submissions. Another nice thing is that you're free to play with and update test cases at any time, even after your assignment is published, and it will all auto-update. So another nice thing here is if I'm teaching multiple sections of the same course where I'm using the same content, I only manage one copy. So if I make a mistake in one of my test cases, I only have to update in one place. And then that immediately gets synced out to all the other, all the sections that are using that content, as opposed to having to go like through each section and manually change everything. So we can go back to our test cases actually here, and talk a little bit more about JUnit. So this first test that we did was assert equals, but it's actually a lot of cool options here, utilities that you can use. The first one is assert array equals. And so this will use a different equality rule for checking that arrays are equal. So for right now, I can just hard code this. So I can do 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, and I hope my Java here is correct. We can do assert not null, so I can check that 1 is not null. So that's only for, only have to put one test case, or we can also do a note here. So 1 should not be null. And then we can check that something is null. So we can check that have some other ones here. We can assert a whole list here that I prepared. Assert true, so I can check that something is true. And I can run here and say true is true, and can do a similar test case for assert false, and that'll be the same thing. Assert false is false. And we can also manually fail. So I will up here, these are kind of our key assertion methods, but we can also do cool things manually. So for example, we can check that if a.add 0 and 1 is equal to 1, then we can actually just fail. So this would make sure that our test case never passes. If for example they added this correctly, we can still auto fail. Or let's say 0 and 2 is equal to 1, then we can do auto fail with the message. Oops, that doesn't sound right. So this is also another good way if you want to hide some of the generic JUnit output. You can use this fail option to manage the output to the student directly. And that's the main sort of list here for JUnit test cases. All of this is available directly from that import, so you don't have to import anything else, and you're able to run these test cases in coding rooms here directly. One other neat thing that I'll go through here is you can drop in more tests. So you can do public void my other test, and you can do the same thing here. I could create a new adder and verify something. Oops. Create a new adder and verify some equality in a different way, or I can check that negative integers add correctly. And you can also change the name of the test. So if you want students to clearly be able to understand what a test is about, you can say check that negative numbers add correctly. And one key thing to remember here is that if any of these test cases fails, currently we don't give partial credit. That's going to be coming as a flag, so you'll be able to check whether or not you want those test cases to be graded independently. But that's not available yet, so you can, if you want to have multiple test cases to give partial credit, you can just create multiple unit test cases. So I'm free to create as many of these different test cases as I want. And I can even create another manual test case that will mean your students can have like a certain piece auto-graded and then a certain piece that you'll go through and grade yourself manually as well. So that pretty much, in about 40-45 minutes here, we kept it on schedule, pretty much covers auto-grading with coding rooms. I'll drop into one last feature, which is our gradebook, as the instructor, a really cool feature lives in this gradebook, which is that ability to drop into students' code in real time. And basically, as students progress, you'll see all their data fill out here, and we're working on more charts and visualizations and data for you in this gradebook view as well. But all your key data is available there. So I'll open it up to any live questions that we might have, and I'm happy to answer them on the live stream or on Facebook chat or through our support chat on the site afterwards. And I hope that you really enjoyed going through this basically end-to-end demo of how to use coding rooms with auto-grading, input-output grading, a small focus on, a particular focus on JUnit, managing your student grades, and really this entire life cycle. And we hope this helps save you a lot of time grading your assignments for your students. Thank you for joining us, and I'm going to be staying here on video to go through any questions that come up on the live stream. And we're checking them on our social media now. And also for if you want to share this with your colleagues or just on other social media, the recording on Facebook is pretty much immediately available, and on YouTube sometimes there's a bit of a lag, but it will also be posted on YouTube, and it should be available on Twitch also for I think a week, if that's their retention policy. And thank you, Lisa, for all your great questions and your feedback on the assignments functionality. We'll be sure to incorporate everything into our upcoming revisions. And also we're doing this again tomorrow at the same time. So Friday night, 7:30 p.m. Eastern time, we'll be doing the same webinar, hopefully incorporating some of your feedback as well. And it will also be live, so if you want to ask your questions live, be happy to do that. So it looks like we pretty much got to everything. Oh, thank you, Tyrannosaurus Rex, on the live chat for feedback. I think with that, I will probably let everyone go, and we will move to answering questions on the chat. Oh, just one question came in. More question. So for the language for tomorrow will be JUnit again. That's kind of what we planned for. I'm happy to drop in another language if you like at the end of the live stream tomorrow. And we can work on that, because we are supporting JavaScript and Python. Those are the three languages right now that support unit testing. So for JavaScript, that's Jasmine, Jest initially. We're working on Jasmine for that as well. And for Python, that's the standard lib, the built-in unit test, just the unit test library. And we'll also be shipping more unit testing frameworks out for more languages in the coming weeks here as well. So I think with that, we'll stop our live stream, and we'll be with you on Facebook. Thank you so much for the folks who joined us live, and also for those of us who are watching on recording. I really look forward to hearing more of your feedback and doing more of these live webinar sessions. And please do give us your feedback on this. This is just our first time, and I think we can cover a lot of ground and help a lot of people doing these live sessions. So I look forward to participating more here and seeing your comments on our different community channels. And with that, I hope that you have a wonderful Friday and upcoming weekend. I'd like to say goodbye from the entire team. Goodbye and thank you from the entire team at Coding Rooms. And we'll see you on the next live stream. Thank you.